Okay, good morning. Welcome. Hello. Today we're here to talk about what's a grief ritual anyway. Um, s- so you may have been hearing me talk about the grief ritual coming up with the Sanctuary Northwest on October 15th. Making room for what is a ritual of grief and gladness. And maybe you've been curious, or maybe you've been like, why would I want to do a grief practice? What even is a grief practice? Um, why would anyone want to go to something like that? And so if that's what you've been curious about, that's what I'm here to address with you today. So if you're joining, feel free to just put your name in the chat, or if you're watching this later, love to hear who you are, where you are in the world. You can say hello. Um, so yeah, like if you've been curious about what a grief ritual is, or maybe you're like, ugh, who would want to do that? Why would I want to do that? Here's what I would respond with. Have you ever felt alone, or are you feeling alone, stuck, or overwhelmed in your emotional experience? And it doesn't have to just be grief, or even maybe you're not even able to name it as anything in particular just yet. Or maybe you've been experiencing what I'm calling secondary symptoms like irritability or depression or heaviness, or kind of a humming anxiety that you can't quite identify. Or maybe you've been through a major or minor life transition that you just quite can't quite settle into, or there are parts of it that kind of keep catching or feeling incomplete or unmetabolized. You know, we use that word often regarding emotions at all of any kind, but particularly grief. Or are you interested and possibly new to, maybe you're just curious about gently exploring what it means to be in a more harmonious relationship with grief. So if that it's if any of those connect, I invite you to consider grief as a kind of portal of transformation. This is the phrase that my friend Yvette Morel would often say, that grief is a portal of transformation. So, in general, what I can offer is a grief ritual is an intentional time to be in relationship with grief, and whatever else keeps us from being in a good enough relationship with it. It doesn't have to look any particular way. Um, it it doesn't even have to necessarily elicit what we might identify as sadness or grief, or the symptoms or the expressions of that. Um, However, it may brings that phrase may bring something particular to mind for some folks. So I want to just address that. And hi there, thanks for joining. Feel free to just say hi in the chat. Um, and I would love to hear from folks who are watching, what comes to mind when you hear the word grief, and what comes to mind when you hear the word ritual. These are really evocative words, and they can, yeah, connect to or be associated with a lot of different things in our world. So I don't use them lightly in describing the practice that we're doing, but I do like to kind of get on the same page with folks, or kind of explore the complexity of those words. So love to hear what comes up with you with those words. So I first became familiar with grief ritual as a term through the work of Subonfe Somé, which some of you may know. Uh, she is the West African spiritual teacher who, with her spouse Malidoma, taught adaptations of the Dagara spirituality to the West. And what I've heard of the spaces that she held was that they were powerful and expressive. And I, to my great sadness, never had the chance to study with her before she passed in 2017. I had like a couple of chances to, and it didn't work out at those times. And then she passed. So although I've never been directly shaped by her work, it definitely has been a part of the field, and I bow to Subonfe Somé as a good teacher in the lineage of this practice and kind of what's been bringing it a little more forward in the United States and the West. For me, my understanding, my impression, and kind of what I've heard secondhand from her work, though, like what I do and what I call grief practice is much more simple, much more everyday, much more ordinary, much more low key than what I imagine or what I've heard described or what it may evoke for some of you, especially if you've done any work in that lineage. And most of what I do comes out of just my own experience, being alive in a body and working with my own grief, working with the things that I've learned along the way that to help me feel and express and be less debilitated, be less rigid around the many deaths that occur as a part of life and how I am in relationship with those. Most recently, I've been influenced by working with Larissa Call and other peers within the animist arts world. And I'll share one simple phrase that I gathered from Larissa, who writes about defining grieving as the act of allowing pleasure and pain to meet and to open more fully to loss and love as teachers. So that's been a big influence on me. Um, and and I would say probably more in the way that's been like with Larissa, I got more language and kind of more specific skill um, in framing things I had been experiencing and things I'd been sort of gathering, but not quite able to put all the pieces together with it. I also like to be explicit about like the backdrop of us practicing grief practice, particularly in the US, is that, we've by and large exiled grief um, as as a being. Um, being built on colonialism, slavery, indigenous erasure, uh, capitalist extreme. The land we occupy, the air we breathe, is saturated in a backlog of undigested grief, of unreckoned with uh, wrongs and fracturing dissociation from the actual pain of what's brought our nation to be. So I've I'll also share a strong influence has been the work of Christian scholar Soon Cha Ra, who writes about that American white Christians can't address racism because of our failure to lament. So that's part of kind of where this work emerges from. And yeah, I'd love to hear what those words evoke for you. Like, what does grief evoke for you? What does ritual evoke for you? If you want to share that in the chat, I'd love to hear. So, given those components, for me, it's grief work has been a really essential part of any other spiritual, cultural, relational, and justice work that we might engage, especially for me as a white person raised in the US. It's been, very essential to as a way of reassociating me and my capacity to sense and be with my own humanity and the web of life that includes that whole array of both beautiful and devastating experiences. So my version of it is not intended to be hugely cathartic. We set up a space, we kind of curate a space together where nothing needs to happen, but rather there's room for something to happen if it wants to. There's room for things to show up. and communicate with us and dance with us if they want to. Grief is an energy that often gets stuck, or as I said, is one of the more avoided or exiled emotions in our culture. So we make a particular invitation to let grief in, but it doesn't mean it will show up necessarily. It doesn't mean it'll show up for every person, and especially not in the same way. So I do this, like these very sort of low key versions of it, mostly to be in alignment with my experiences, my level of skill in sort of holding those spaces, and my cultural context, where because grief is not a part of our sort of everyday cultural hygiene and metabolic process. um, I tend to keep these spaces pretty mild. They people I've expressed having powerful experiences, and um, my intention is that they're moderate enough to land in a good way, um, into the rest of our life. And the rest of our life is still like this very grief phobic world. So the it's a gentle arc. Um, so I wanted to describe a little more in particular, like what will the grief practice look like? It's a 3 hour time, but just to be clear, I like to, you know, assuage any anxieties. We don't just sit in a circle and cry for 3 hours. And you're not like bearing your soul of all your deepest wounds and heartaches. It's 3 hours so that there can be kind of a lot of cushion around a couple of maybe closer points of contact or encounter moments that may in those moments feel a little more acute, or may catch a wave of something very deep and very real. It might be in sharing, it might be in just your personal experience of it, or um, sensing in the group experience. Um, but those are intended as like, um, yeah, little peaks within a much wider cushion of um, kind of receiving and integration. So the 3 hours of time is broken up into what I call the three different waves. So there's a first sort of wave that is sort of a warm up. That section is called greeting all things. So it's a warm up. We use movement, sensory noticing, sound, touch. Um, Sometimes we use a little bit of music. Yeah. So that time is a little bit of just like arriving in and acknowledging what is present. The second wave is the making room for all things wave. And this is more of a contemplative practice, a guided visualization, um, but that still anchors in sensory noticing, still anchors in body awareness and um, with a real grounded focus. And then the third wave is called Gathering at the Ancestral Fire. And this is a, a guided visualization practice that has the option for expression or sharing in very simple, sort of prompted ways, um, if people want to take that step of being witnessed and witnessing each other. And then we have a cool down resting time where we really let our own physical bodies and the earth and the unseen world assist us with sort of moving through the energy that has been stirred up. And then we close with an integration period. Sometimes it's writing or drawing. It might just be more resting, um, some song, um, so a little bit of reflection um, as a group. And that's it. It's also, as you will know, it's online, so you will be able to be in your own space in whatever way is, comfortable for you, and you can get expressive or, not in your own space. This is actually what I think is one of the great benefits of being able to do this work virtually is, yeah, you can take up as much space as you want, or make noise, do other things that feel supportive for you in your own space, um, without any of the kind of maybe self-conscious barriers, or while other people can be doing different things that support them in their own ways. So that's one thing I love about it. All the while in this time, I will continue to nurture and offer tools of movement and sound and touch and sensory awareness and, you know, art, or whatever else supports you in sort of moving through and processing, distributing, and metabolizing the energy that arises. Um, and we'll practice keeping ourselves within a manageable enough, what the phrase that I use that maybe you've heard from me or from other modalities, that manageable enough window of tolerance, with the aim that nobody gets fried by too much coming through at once. Of course, I can't promise that. A lot may come through, but the intention is to keep it fairly chill. So, despite that simplicity and keeping it pretty chill, I have had participants report it being a very powerful experience. What folks have shared with me is experiencing things like a deep peace, a surprising peace and peace of mind. Like they could finally let something go and move forward, move past something that had been sort of stuck in their system. The experience of relief from heaviness, from kind of a feeling of being burdened or weighted down, not feeling so alone with those burdens. And then this is a little more particular, but being able to approach anniversaries of deaths or other challenging life circumstances with less fear, with less anxiety, and more creativity, um, for integrating or honoring those periods, and bringing them kind of back into the flow of life. So, though this is a one time thing for now, the goal is for encountering grief to become over time just much more simple, easy, a frequent part of life, like brushing our teeth, like washing our clothes, that it's just a part of um, what we do to keep a balance in our inner ecology and in how we're engaging our spheres, our world. So that is what I wanted to share today. That's um, what a grief ritual is to me, or when you practice grief ritual with me, that's what it will look like. So happy to hear any questions or comments. What did you hear in this that you connected to? Is there anything that feels dissonant, or you still have kind of a not so sure about that? Please share it in the chat. I'll try to address what I can. Um, and I would love for you to join us in the grief ritual on October 15th. It's a Saturday, it goes from 10 to 1. It's on a sliding scale, and no one will be turned away for lack of funds. So, this is part of our kind of give back to the community. And yeah, what I hope to nurture as like community hygiene. So, please sign up, and please share this offering with anyone you know who might find it useful. Anyone who's been going through a difficult transition, um, maybe who has been expressing some of those secondary symptoms, but can't quite get to the root of it, or who's feeling, kind of stuck, overwhelmed, isolated in their experience of um, grief, whatever they're going through. Please share this with them. Um, I would love to have you and yours join. All right. Thank you so much, and have a beautiful rest of your day. And happy fall. Yesterday was the equinox. Happy equinox.